Hello, everyone. This is Eva Nordic-Smith with YogaUOnline, and I wanted to extend a warm welcome to all of you for this talk with Dr. Ginger Garner on the essential vagus nerve, keys to health and well-being. We're particularly pleased to be here today with Ginger. She is one of the leading voices in integrating the many therapeutic applications of yoga with cutting-edge advances in medical research. Ginger is a doctor of physical therapy and the creator of the Professional Yoga Therapy Institute, which trains health professionals in yoga therapy. And she is also the author of Medical Therapeutic Yoga, which is a major work on the therapeutic benefits of yoga. So Ginger, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Eva. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. That's an understatement. I love talking about the vagus nerve.
Oh, great. Yeah, so we are here to talk particularly about the vagus nerve and why it's so receiving so much attention in the medical community today as an important means for enhancing our health and well-being and slowing aging, preventing chronic disease. And more specifically, we'll explore how yoga can help stimulate the vagus nerve and specific techniques we can use for that. And Ginger will also give a preview of her course on YogaUOnline, where she goes more into depth on the new discoveries into the vagus nerve and yoga techniques for enhancing vagal tone. And everyone listening in, if you have questions for Ginger, please post them in the comments below. We'll be taking questions and comments at the end. But first, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture, which is stress. We all have it, and we all struggle to deal with it from time to time. So we all know that stress is not just unpleasant, it also makes us much more susceptible to pretty much any chronic disease in the book. Correct me, Ginger, if I'm wrong.
That's right.
And even worse, for some of us, it makes us age faster.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really in that context that helping us build greater resilience against stress is where the vagus nerve is starting to receive a lot of attention. So Ginger, tell us, first of all, what is the vagus nerve and why is it considered to be so important as a means of helping us deal better with stress?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I just want to say that was a great kind of overview of the importance of the vagus nerve. So thanks for giving the audience that. Just some basics on the vagus nerve, because it tends to get tossed around. What is it? Well, it's the largest nerve in the autonomic nervous system. And the Latin term vagus means wandering. So it really was given a very appropriate name of the wandering nerve, because the branches of the nerve go everywhere and affect everything from the brain as the vagus exits to the mouth and the vocal cords, through the respiratory diaphragm, down to the colon, the digestive system, and the pelvic floor. And I think what's most important about the vagus nerve is that it's estimated that at a minimum of 80% of the vagus nerve is receptive. It's receiving information and then processing that. Those, the input into the vagus is what's so important, that afferent input. So that's a little bit about what the vagus nerve is. Why is it so important? Well, research, and it's challenging just to keep up with that. So I don't claim to be the expert on the vagus. I just am enjoying continuing to keep up with the research, and sometimes you feel like you're kind of hanging on to keep up with it. But a few of the things that we do know about the vagus from research is there's kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly on the vagus. Which do we want to start with first?
I guess I like the good first.
Okay, all right, let's go with the good. We'll go in order: the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is, if we address vagal tone in a way that is safe and healthy for the individual, we can expect a host of benefits, like better coping. When when something happens, minimal or, a more maximal event, when something happens, you're more likely to be able to deal with that. Most everyone's heard of the phrase that Daniel Goleman coined, emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It impacts that ability to have emotional intelligence through what Dr. Stephen Porges calls that face-heart connection, which is the vagus is in charge of. And we tend to lose that connection, that face-heart connection, to speak a language where we can have relationship with each other if the vagus isn't functioning properly, if what's called the vagal brake isn't functioning properly. Mm-hmm. We can enjoy better resilience. And everybody wants that, because we're not trying to eliminate stress, which is kind of laughably impossible. We're just trying to change the way that our body processes it and manages it. Mm-hmm. On the more fun side of the good, if you have good vagal tone, you're going to have better sex. You're going to have a stronger voice. Uh-huh. In the age of what's happening now with let's just say, with women's rights, the Me Too movement, having that voice is really important. So that's something that I would speak to every single survivor that is speaking up right now is, let's work on, as a collective community, that vagal tone for that Me Too movement, because we need that. You can improve communication. Because you'll have better relationships. That face-heart connection allows you to read someone's emotions, to understand what they're feeling, to be empathic, and yet not take it on to the point where you become debilitated from kind of soaking in everyone's emotions and feelings. Improved stamina is another benefit, and better digestion. And in the context of yogic philosophy and its sister science of Ayurveda, everything begins and ends in the gut. So we need healthy digestion. And that, I think, is probably the biggest driver for vagal health and tone, is that we are treating the gut well. So we could open a huge can of proverbial worms and talk about how nutrition can affect that vagal tone and impact pain management for people. We're also going to talk about how yoga can do it, but nutrition is a whole other aspect of it that we could discuss. So that's some of the good, and I'm sure I missed some points because there's a lot of good.
Yeah, it sounds like you went down everyone's wish list for things to improve.
I think if we just got maybe 4 or 5 of those things, we're good.
We'd be happy. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. The bad. Here's the bad. If we don't have good vagal tone, then it's been associated with higher CRP levels. Now, what the heck is that? That is our kind of circulating level of inflammation found in the bloodstream. And there are several biomarkers that we won't even, get into, different chemicals that you can find that will be up in the bloodstream, higher or elevated in the bloodstream, that will demarcate, whoa, inflammation, big red signals, going off. Well, when we have that, we have higher rates of depression, PTSD, sexual dysfunction, chronic disease, vocal issues, which is not surprising, more difficult time with giving birth. Under chronic disease, you have things like diabetes, certain types of cancer, weight management issues, poor autism outcomes, because that is a really broken connection for them, and they're not able to understand or receive that physical connection or emotional connection. And I'll kind of explain that. I'll expand on that in a minute using a couple of tools I have here. And I mentioned PTSD, even worse presentations of epilepsy, because deep brain stimulation of the vagus has shown to improve epilepsy outcomes for people who suffer from that. My grandfather was disabled his entire life because of epilepsy. What if we had what we have now. He may have not been considered absolutely disabled by that. So
Right.
the last thing about the vagus that makes it so incredibly important, and that's the ugly part, is that if we allow ourselves to, continue to go down that slope of losing that face-heart connection, of losing subdiaphragmatic, below the respiratory muscle health, then we slip into a cycle or a circuit is what I like to call it, that can lead to dissociation. You've probably known someone who, maybe it's a veteran. I live next to two of the biggest military bases in the world, and that's just it's common. PTSD and dissociation disorder, where you see someone, you may ask them a question that's maybe a trigger, or maybe they see something that's a trigger, or maybe they hear, if it's a service member, a military service member, maybe they hear fireworks on the 4th of July. That's a trigger. They can go into several different vagal responses. And one of the worst ones, or the worst one that you can have, is a dorsal vagus circuit. Now, you don't have to remember that. We can just call it DVC. And that's where you begin to dissociate. You can go into fight, you can go into flight, but at its worst, the DVC, the ugly circuit, is the one that causes the heart rate to slow down incredibly. You start to disconnect from reality, which can even lead to complete shutdown of the individual and death.
Wow.
So that's truly the ugly side of it. But if we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of the vagus, that's kind of the overarching themes of why it's so important.
Yeah, yeah. And you call it the good, the bad, and the ugly, but for me, it's sort of like all good, because it gives us something that explains a lot of things, and something we can focus on that can actually help improve our lives in a number of different areas, whether or not we're dealing with wellness issues and just want to enhance how we feel or how we cope with stress, or improve digestion, or deal with some of the more difficult issues that is part of the human condition. So how do you influence the vagus nerve? I mean, we think of nerves as the conduit of information from the brain to the body, and passive things that we can't really do anything about. But it seems like the research is saying you can stimulate the vagus nerve, you can enhance vagal tone. So what's involved with that, and how is that even possible?
Okay. I think one of the things to mention, just to shore up what you were saying, which was wonderful, Eva, is that we take all that information about the importance of the vagus nerve, and just to use as an example, this week I just posted on my blog at gingergarner.com probably the most difficult post I've ever done in my whole life. If you reflect on it, your hands might get sweaty, right? That anxiety type feeling. Butterflies in the stomach or knots in the stomach, you start to sweat, your palms get sticky. That kind of inducing situation, which means you can get there goes the vagus. It's taking over. It's going in down that path. So for me, that post can induce that. It took me over a decade to do this post because it's about sexual assault and being a survivor and being a part of the Me Too movement. And so when you said you mentioned you label it the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I consider it all good. That's a great way to put it, because we're not seeking perfection. Nobody rises up like the phoenix out of the ashes, healed for good, right? We don't improve vagal tone and go, I've reached homeostasis. And now I can just sit back and I'll have great coping mechanisms forever. If only it were that easy. So I just want to, if anybody's out there listening going, okay, what can I do? But now I'm even anxious thinking about the event. Exhale and realize that no one's perfect. I certainly haven't. If you take the time to read my post from this week on my blog, you'll learn a lot about, where I've come from and why this is so important to me and how I use it with my patients, and that we're all moving in a direction of healing, that we should give each other grace and that it is all good. So thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. So to answer your question, I have my handy little, I like examples, giving people like physical examples. This is a finger labyrinth. Have you seen one of these before? Oh, I love this thing. One of my very best good friends gave this to me. And it's just like your walking labyrinth, right? Those medieval labyrinths.
Nice.
And I think that in order to understand how we can affect vagal tone, we need to understand something called Polyvagal Theory. And you don't have to know any technical terms or remember really any technical terms. But if you think of it as this labyrinth, if I start, it's kind of like reading a book. If I start and I just follow the labyrinth with my finger, right? It's very calming. It's very relaxing. You could call this the good vagal circuit, right? That's called the ventral vagus response or circuit. That is the one that is evolved. It's also called myelinated, which means it transmits messages faster, according to the theory. So this is my ventral vagus circuit. I'm in my happy place. I'm just walking the labyrinth. I'm doing my thing. I'm not distracted. I don't feel anxious. I'm good. But then, just like a lizard laying out in the woods or lying out in the woods, I always get those two mixed up. He's out on the woods, or let's call it a she. She's out in the woods. She's on her log. She's sunning herself. She's happy. But then she sees you or me, and we're happy. We're in our happy place, in the labyrinth. She sees you. We're not likely to be afraid of a lizard, but the lizard is likely to be concerned about us because we are much bigger than they are. So the lizard has a couple of choices. The lizard can stay in their happy place and pretend as if they don't see us, but the lizard has a reptilian, unevolved brain. They don't get to enjoy the benefits of good food or good wine or anything like that. So they have this unevolved brain, and they're likely to take two of the circuits, okay? The one that comes outside of this labyrinth, the one that is fight, flight, or freeze. And the lizard is smart enough to know that it probably shouldn't fight you. So it's more likely to flee or just freeze until you're gone, and then it goes back to being in its happy place again in its little labyrinth. There's another response though. If that lizard thinks that it is near death, it might slow its heart rate, even stop breathing, even pass out, a vasovagal syncope. It may pass out. So we don't want to be the lizard passing out or fight or flight or freeze unless that fight or flight or freeze is necessary. But the problem is Americans get stuck in, and I won't just say Americans, we get stuck in that loop of running from the tiger or thinking we have to fight back against something constantly. We are constantly bombarded with information. And so I say all that because some of the strategies I'm about to give you do matter to be aware of this. So there's this channel of the Polyvagal Theory, the ventral vagus circuit, where you can be in your labyrinth and you want to reach the center, right? Kind of the epicenter of the happy place. That's the ventral vagus response that we're going for, the happy response, the good vagal break. When that doesn't happen, and we're the lizard that thinks we're startled and we have to make a run for it or fight, then we go into our other response, which we know as the sympathetic response. We don't want to get stuck there, but it can be a good response. And then the last one is the one I mentioned, the kind of the ugly response where someone can even experience dissociation, shutdown, or even death. Okay, so there's the three channels. Those are our choices, right? We'd like to be here. Right. So what happens? You know, someone comes into your yoga class and you're feeling a little bit like the lizard. Ooh, you know, too much input. Maybe it was like too much traffic. You're stuck. You know, whatever. Bad day at work. Bad hair day. Whatever. And you get into yoga class, and after that yoga class, you're just, you're there. Yeah, you're there. You want it to last. What is that, right? We have just successfully captured, you know, our Zen spot here, our walking the labyrinth, our happy place, our sacred space, whatever we want to call it. But the key reason we're talking about this is for some people, maybe that doesn't work. What if the switch doesn't flip, right? So sometimes that doesn't happen. Someone may go into a yoga class and they come out and they may be not where they wanted to be. Maybe there was a trigger. Maybe it's something we as a teacher or a therapist or whatever we're doing, we missed a cue. We missed something somewhere. So that's kind of the last part of what I wanted to talk about, is that's when we need trauma-sensitive yoga. And some people, and I would have asked myself the same question. Had I not gone through such trauma in my life to get to where I am now, I might have asked the question like, well, isn't all yoga therapy or isn't all yoga trauma-sensitive by nature? Unfortunately, it isn't. There are a few things that we need to be aware of. So to finally get around to answering your question, there's a few like nervous systems, since we're talking about nervous system balance, which is, you know, kind of a big blanket term for what we're talking about with vagal tone. We can call them nervous system hacks, you know, if you will. How can we hack the vagus nerve and get it to do what we want it to do? Well, first we can spend more time laughing. That really helps because it is a trigger for vagal tone. So that's one easy hack. And I try to do that a great deal. In my kind of amateur career as a musician in jazz and soul and, you know, singing Americana, I work with a lot of African-American musicians and, we have the best time. I also love, you know, hanging out in churches where we can get together and sing like that, whether it's a church or a temple or whatever you want to call it, because we laugh and we have a good time. And that is probably the very first thing that I want you to think about, whether you're someone who's experienced trauma or you're a teacher and you want to be trauma sensitive, is create a sacred, safe environment for your classes, for your patients, for individuals that are coming to see you, even your family members that you know that have experienced some trauma. So I guess the easiest way for me to think about this is if you close your eyes for a minute, think about a time where you felt completely at home, and I'm closing my eyes with you, completely comfortable. You felt welcomed. You felt a deep sense of calm, of peace, and of joy. When is the last time that you felt that? If you consider, if you embody that, you'll be able to feel characteristics rise to the surface. Maybe it's sitting by the warm fire with a cup of tea, since it's winter. I don't want to impose my idea of sacred space on you. So this is your exercise. And then just slowly allow your eyes to open. I call that, and there's a more formal program associated with it called Gracious Space. And I try to do that with every class that I instruct, every continuing education course and workshop, is go to that sense of home and comfort. Even if it's up here, even if I'm in the middle of terrible traffic, even if it's before I take a test, my kids take a test and I'm talking to them, go find that comfort place. And I invite you to have your students imagine that in their class. Go to that place of gracious space. They will be much less likely to have, triggers. The second thing that really comes to my mind, especially with this music background and knowing how important that is for a lot of people. A lot of people, that's just common sense. Like, oh yeah, music gets me through so much. If I'm stressed, I turn on Mozart. Or, if I'm stressed, I turn on Stevie Wonder, and I'm dancing it out. Or you sing in the bathtub or the shower or the car or whatever. So I think you inherently know how important music is. There are a finite number of ways to impact vagal tone. There's just not 500 ways to do it. The voice and sound is one of them. So the practical takeaway tip I would say here is think about someone you love, maybe your little kid, singing you a lullaby. I do this one a lot, with my kids. In fact, a quick story about my son. He had cardiothoracic surgery. He had heart surgery when he was 2.
Wow.
And he was nonverbal. He didn't have any language. He wasn't speaking. And it gives me chills to think about it. He was in ICU, and we finally got to go back and see him. He was stabilized, and I was standing by his bedside, and he had, I counted, it was over 14 lines and tubes, coming out of his body, everywhere, head to toe. And he's just laying there. He's so tiny, and they're obviously doing a pretty good job controlling his pain, but they're trying to keep him just below consciousness so that he does not try to pull everything out because it's too early. So he is coming in and out of consciousness. And as he is becoming conscious, I'm sure he's in pain, and also very afraid, and because he's restrained. How do you soothe, a child?
Right.
And in that moment, I was pretty anxiety ridden, but trying not to externally show that. And it had blocked me from thinking of the most simple thing. And it's when my husband looked up at me and said, sing. Because he would wake up and try to pull all the lines and tubes out, and we know he couldn't do that.
Right.
So I sang that song. Everybody knows, you are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. And he just calmed down. He stopped trying to pull all the lines out, and we just stood by his bed for hours. And every time he would get upset, I would start singing again, and just put a hand on him. And it never failed. He always calms down. So I want you to think about a lullaby. Those pitches of a mother's voice are higher, and they are associated with getting through to the middle ear. And I like to use a drum as an example. This is my time goes by so fast. He's 7 now. My 7-year-old's drum that's been through all 3 of my boys. And if you think about the middle ear, as a drum, the drum head is tight, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way, this is the eardrum, okay? So if I just do this, on the drum, a drummer I am not, but it's fun to play. If you have a well-toned middle ear, then higher frequencies get through, just like that lullaby. That gets through to the brain, and the body and the mind perceive safety. If the middle ear is not toned, low frequencies get through, the scary sounds. Think about a horror movie, right? What happens? What do they play when they want someone to feel fear? They play low frequencies. Those tones signal a predator. Somebody is after you. Nobody likes to feel that way, but you can instantly kind of feel it in your gut when you start to think about those low frequency tones in a scary movie. What I would like for you to focus on in your yoga classes is, can you focus on higher frequencies? Go higher. Maybe go a little lighter with your voice. Pick a hertz frequency. There's an easy app you can use on your phone. It's free. I have one called Pano Tuner. Just whip out that app and measure the frequency of what you're listening to. Go high. Alfred Tomatis was one of the earliest researchers in music, and he found that listening to the violin at 5,000 hertz sent us back to a brain state, an alpha brain state that was calm, but cool and collected, a rest and digest state.
Right.
So when you're in doubt, go higher on your vocal frequencies, go lighter. You want those, the airways, the sound traveling on that, you want them to penetrate and get through the eardrum into the middle ear and signal safety.
Yeah.
Lullaby.
That's beautiful.
One more thing, when you're considering sound in your room, try to cut out background noise. It's why, we're wearing headphones now. We're trying to cut out all the extra noise. I'll use an autism example because it's a very common thing I have to deal with every day. An autism example would be a child sitting in class, math class, and the instructor is speaking, the teacher's speaking to them. And maybe it's a male teacher and they're speaking in low frequency tones and the child isn't doing well. So, they start rocking, right? That's one of the strategies that you can do to help. Sacral stimulation, rocking over the sacrum. That's why they do that. Other children with autism what will they do? They'll make noises. They'll start humming to themselves, or like my son will do. My oldest son is on the spectrum. He will have outbursts, not angry outbursts, but just a singing outburst or a noise outburst. And really, he's self-soothing the vagus. He is trying to improve tone, and they don't know anything about what they're doing, but it works, right? Yeah. Weighted blankets, they work. Sacral stimulation, it works. Higher frequencies, that math teacher speaking to them, if he senses fear, no wonder he can't learn math. He's hearing a booming low frequency, and they also don't learn by seeing necessarily, by hearing. They learn by doing. Pick up a board, give them an example, let them fidget with something in class. Those are the people that can't be still, right?
Right.
Maybe they need the weighted blanket. Maybe the lights are too much. Maybe there's too much background noise. Right. Because if the frequencies are competing, if the high frequency is competing with the low frequency, the predator sound wins. Right. And then they can't learn their math. They get agitated. They start doing behaviors that, as a society, we have historically condemned those behaviors. But these children and these people with PTSD or autism are brilliant because they have learned how to self-soothe. They can't completely heal themselves, but at least now we have the neuroscience to support their well-being and their health and all of our health. So I think some of these tips that I'm just tossing out there, everybody can benefit from. You don't have to teach trauma-sensitive yoga to people who've experienced trauma to use them. Just start using them in all of your classes and, in your interactions with your clients or your patients or whoever you're working with.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Well, thank you. There's
yeah, go ahead.
one more thing, because I can't leave this out, is the breath work. And you know how important it is. There's a multitude of ways that we can practice the breath, but I'll just leave you with this one little tip. And these are all research-based. This is based on a study that was done, a couple of studies that was done, that showed women pictures of things that would have been slightly disturbing, and pelvic floor tone increased. There's tension, right? That is, and the gut will do the same. Then what is the vagus going to do when it receives that information? Since most of the vagus, what happens in the vagus is that receiving of information and then reacting to it. Their experience of fear was heightened. Now, in a second study, what they looked at is how the breath impacted the brain's perception of fear. And what they found was when someone experienced something that could be construed as anxiety inducing, and the key word here is perceive. To us, it may not seem like it's anxiety producing, but to them, the person, it's real, and we have to honor that and respect that. So, oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. Just a second. Oh, so when they are given those images that can be a little bit disturbing, when they inhaled, they perceived more fear. They had more fear. Mm-hmm. When they saw the images on the exhale, they perceived less fear. So this last take home, and I'll stop throwing out tips after this one, is when you experience anxiety, when you experience fear, when you don't feel safe, elongate your exhale as much as you can. And if you have to come face to face with that stressor, do it on an exhale. And try to not think about that on the inhale, if that helps at all.
Yeah. Beautiful. We have just a few minutes left. I wanted to see if anyone has any questions. If you have questions, please put them into the comments below. And also, Ginger, lots of shout outs to you for your beautiful voice.
Oh, it's like breathing. I have to sing every day.
And someone, I can't find the comment here right now, but someone Carol took offense to you calling the dorsal ventral response ugly, because as she said, it is just a normal part of how we function and how the human body responds to things. And
well, the dorsal vagus response is not something that we want, actually. It's the only one of the vagal responses, a part of polyvagal theory, that we actually don't want to have happen. The sympathetic nervous system response is necessary when we need to fight or flee. We want the ventral vagus response, but the dorsal vagus response is severely hindering to the individual and can cause them to be non-functional or even lead to death. So, yet death can be good, I suppose. Death cannot be ugly for some people, but it's not a response that we actually need. And it's not a normal part of functioning. So I want to make that distinction. Dorsal vagus response is not just another option for us. It's something to avoid. Maybe that clarifies a little bit.
Yes, definitely. Let's see. Mara is asking, what about sleeping on the left side? Does that stimulate the vagal nerve?
I haven't read anything about that, but we can make this kind of inference from that. If you're sleeping on your left side, if you've ever had a stomach ache or any kind of sigmoid colon, kind of left-sided issues, it does feel better to sleep on your left side and kind of curl up, right? So you could make a case that if you're feeling more anxiety, that could create some digestive ills, and that laying on your left side can facilitate normal digestion. So you could make kind of you could draw a relationship there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see, Betsy is saying, my daughter has a vasovagal response to the sight of blood, or even reading a book that mentions blood. Her response is fainting.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain this?
That's a classic response of vasovagal syncope. That's down in the dorsal vagus area, which is where we don't want to go. I wouldn't want that for her, you know, her whole life. If she has that response with the sight or reading about blood, it may carry over into other patterns as well, which could have a big impact depending on her age. You know, if she goes on to, you know, have children, caregive for other people, the job she can choose, how she interacts and communicates with people. So I can see how that can really impact her. There may be some desensitization exercises that can be done. EMDR is something that I might recommend, eye movement desensitization retraining. If you haven't looked into that, give that a Google, EMDR, and see if that's something that might resonate. I have found that can be very beneficial when you're talking about cognitive behavioral therapies. You know, in psychotherapy, some of those things can be really successful, which can desensitize the hypervigilance, which is what she's experiencing. Kind of the whole body going into, this is so much for me, I can't take it, and I'm out of here, right? So that would be a couple of things. It's the cognitive behavior therapy, and EMDR can be successful too. So hopefully that'll help.
Yeah, excellent. Good. And one person wanted to know the applications of vagal tone or vagus nerve therapy for arterial fibrillation. Is that something you can talk about? I know it's a big topic, but
sometimes, and this depends on age. Is there any existing chronic disease like cardiovascular disease or hardening of the arteries, that kind of thing? The age of the person would matter. Whether or not they're pregnant would also matter. There's a carotid exercise that you can do, which is basically blocking that will sometimes stop that from happening. I've also heard of breath holding, which would be just taking some more yogic breathing, right. And taking that to heart and practicing those breath suspensions, like in Anuloma and Viloma Pranayam. Try that. That's the second one. And the third one, and this could be just shocking the vagus a little bit, is ice water, drinking ice water.
Interesting.
It is. I don't know, how much validation we'll find of that in the literature, and yet I keep seeing that over and over as a strategy.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's 3 things you can try.
Great. Well, last questions, and then we'll let you go. Let's see. Anne-Marie is asking, are you familiar with other fascia balancing approaches to the nervous system? That is, for example, the MILF method, the role model method. She says, from what new research shows, it is as effective as yoga for getting and staying in balance?
I think that, first of all, that's a great question. As a physical therapist in orthopedics and seeing women in chronic pain, the fascia is my first and foremost target when I'm talking about dealing with persistent pain, which can be kind of a psycho-emotional thing or physical. The fascia is capable of transferring load, of contracting, of acting. It's not just the muscle. The fascia can kind of live and breathe too. It's its own organ, if you will. And because it has that capability, I do believe that it has a response that is that's influenced by the vagus. So if you feel fear, if you are tensing, if digestion is changing, if your breathing pattern is changing, and if you're constantly in that sympathetic nervous response of running from the tiger, how's your fascia going to like that? Not so much.
Right.
So some of the more aggressive techniques that maybe I would have learned 20 years ago when I was a brand new PT, or I'm also a licensed athletic trainer, that I would have used on the field, like for football and soccer and all this, extreme, rough and tumble stuff. I don't use that. I don't use the extreme methods for treating fascia. I'll use balls. I will use a gua sha tool, which is a very light myofascial brushing. You're not digging in there like the Graston technique. So yeah, I believe those things work. I also use very easy dry needling to impact the fascia too, from a physical therapy standpoint. So there are so many ways that we can impact the vagus through the fascia as well. It also changes their stress response. Once I begin to touch them in whatever way I'm doing with therapy, that automatically changes that's a treatment of the autonomic nervous system. Just a simple hands-on, without even doing the therapy. But once I'm digging in and doing more therapy, I'm changing their stress response for the positive. Just kind of desensitizing them so that they perceive safety. Right. That's like the key word is safety, perception of safety.
Yeah, beautiful. I said last question, but I'll pick just one tiny little one in. Several people are asking about whether that can help facilitate, stimulate the vagus nerve, and some people are saying, well, is a very low tone, so does that have the opposite response?
I think that's a really good point, and that's where the answer is layered. Let's just take a population I'm familiar with, a military population. Many of them have fought in wars in the Middle East. If you use those lower tone, kind of Sanskrit-based chants, that can be a trigger for things that they heard in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. That's probably not where we want to go with that particular population. For trauma-sensitive yoga for military service members, chanting in that way that can be a mental or emotional trigger to what they experienced when they were in tortuous situations. We may want to use higher tones and go back to picking that higher frequency and not chanting in a lower tone.
Probably chanting is not the best choice of technique for that.
Probably not the best choice anyway. That technique. It could definitely be a trigger. And I know we're going to talk about, the course just a little bit, but I kind of address that in the practice side in kind of an unorthodox way. That's just fun and light. And so just keep that in mind. Yes, that chanting is not always the best, especially for trauma populations.
Yeah, cool. Good. And you made reference, you are teaching a course on YogaU, which we're really excited about. And it is going more deeply into yoga applications for stimulating the vagus nerve and just the overall science behind the vagus nerve and how we can work with it. Could you tell us more about your course on YogaUOnline and what you're covering?
Yeah. First, I know I say this every time, so I'm like, I'm saying it again, but I'm really excited about teaching this. Excited is such an overused word, but I say every course that I teach is my favorite. But I have to say that about this one too.
This is your favorite.
I know. Postpartum's my favorite. Hip is favorite, diaphragms are my favorite. But you know what? The vagus nerve really is the driver of all of that. Like, I can't expect to help someone's hip or pelvic floor or postpartum. I can't put any of that stuff back together without starting here. So this is my favorite. But Okay, a couple things that I'll go over are when to refer. Like you're doing this, you're not sure. When do we refer? How do we set boundaries? What are some trauma sensitive guidelines? What do we need to follow? How do we assess? And what kind of yoga techniques would we use? What's polyvagal theory? And what does it mean for you? Like practically what it means for you. What it means for your yoga practice, what it means for you personally, what it means for how you would teach or how you would see a patient or a client. And then just overall, what's the big picture? When we take 3 steps back, what does the vagus, how does it impact our whole kind of system, mind, body health? Because that's really what we're going for at the end of the day. I might get deep in the weeds talking about autism or PTSD, in military service members, but we also want to back up and go, what does it mean for the bigger, population, so that we can pull everybody in and give them a big hug and have them be okay.
Yeah.
Right? So those are some of the things that I'll cover.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, and one of the reasons we're so excited about the course is learning various ways that you can work with your vagus nerve. Really, as best I can see, is one of the greatest self-care techniques you can develop, because we all know that the rest and digest mode of parasympathetic functioning is one of the best things we can do for enhancing our health and releasing stress. But when we need it the most, relaxation is the hardest to come by. We've all experienced that. We get stuck in hyperdrive. And learning that shift, the different ways where we can, in a sense, from the ground, from the bottom up, work with the body to shift via the vagus response into a more parasympathetic mode of functioning, I think is just so valuable. And we can't wait to learn more about that in the course.
Well, I look forward to sharing what I've learned. And I want to thank everybody for their great questions and comments. I wish I could see all of them right now. Yeah. But if you want to get in touch with me, if you have more questions, you can easily find me on Facebook or on Instagram or my website, gingergarner.com. And I just look forward to carrying on the conversation.
Awesome.
So, thank you.
And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And a special warm thank you to you, Ginger. Thanks for a great talk.
Always wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.